MGTV USA. Οι δραστηριότητες της ελληνοαμερικανικής κοινότητας με βίντεο και πλήρες ρεπορτάζ.
Σήμερα είναι μια πολύ μεγάλη μέρα για την Ορθοδοξία και τον Ελληνισμό. Για την Ορθοδοξία διότι έχουμε την μεγάλη εορτή του Ευαγγελισμού που σημαίνει ερχομό του Υιού του Θεού στον κόσμο, και με τον Ευαγγελισμό αρχίζει αυτή η πολύ μεγάλη ιστορία της σαρκώσεως του Θεού Λόγου στον πρόσωπο του Κυρίου Ιησού Χριστού. Από την άλλη μεριά έχουμε αυτή τη μέρα ως η μέρα της εθνικής ανεξαρτησίας. Δεν είναι τυχαίο ότι οι πρόγονοί μας το 1821 διάλεξαν αυτή τη μέρα για να αρχίσουν τον απελευθερωτικό αγώνα ύστερα από 4 αιώνες δουλείας. Γι' αυτό τον λόγο σήμερα τους θυμούμαστε με πολύ μεγάλη ευγνωμοσύνη και τους θεωρούμε ως πρότυπα προς μίμηση ως προς το θέμα της αγάπης και του πάθους για ελεύθερη, ανεξάρτητη, δημιουργική ζωή. Και γι' αυτό το λόγο σήμερα με πολύ χαρά και με πολύ ενθουσιασμό γιορτάζουμε την διπλή γιορτή. Ο Θεός να είναι μαζί με το έθνος μας στην προσπάθεια που κάνουμε να είμαστε πάντοτε η πρωτοπορία στον πολιτισμό, στη δικαιοσύνη, στα ανθρώπινα δικαιώματα και στην αξιοπρέπεια των ανθρώπων. Και καλούμε στην παρέλαση όλο τον κόσμο. Δεν πρέπει κανείς να μείνει στο σπίτι και να πει θα δω την παρέλαση από την television. Αυτό είναι απαράδεκτο. Όλοι στην Πέμπτη Λεωφόρο την Κυριακή το απόγευμα.
Yes, we are gathered here at the Holy Trinity Cathedral Ballroom. Tonight we're celebrating the Greek Independence Day. Typically on Greek Independence we have an event at the consulate, a reception, and then we come to the ballroom to do a scholar's presentation. Every year we do something different. This particular year we're going to have a talk on the role of Greek women in the Greek War of Independence. It's a fantastic topic, it's a timely topic, and it's a little bit different and nuanced, which is typical of all our presentations from the Cultural and Educational Committee of the Hellenic American Chamber of Commerce. We're here assembled also with the other Hellenic organization, which includes the doctors' organization and the lawyers' organizations. The Archbishop will be here. He's always here every year. We're going to have a small talk from George Diakopoulou, who's the Ambassador and Consul General here in New York. And it'll be a wonderful and fun night. Thank you.
25η Μαρτίου γιορτάσαμε σήμερα και με δοξολογία στο ναό του Ευαγγελισμού της Θεοτόκου στο West Side και με την εξίωση στο προξενείο και με την ομιλία σήμερα εδώ στο Ballroom του Καθεδρικού.
This is our yearly program where we commemorate Hellenic Independence Day. I'd like to thank the other organizations that are with us tonight and have helped in this event and have helped put it together. The Hellenic American Bankers Association, the Hellenic Medical Society of New York, the Hellenic Lawyers Association, the Holy Trinity Cathedral. Thank you all for your contributions to this great event, and it's wonderful to be here. We started this program about 3 years ago, and what we wanted to do is do something different. To have an event at the consulate, and then come here for what we call a scholar's presentation. So this is the 3rd year that we're doing this. This event is being done under the auspices of the Consul General of Greece in New York, and I'd like the honor of having the Ambassador Consul General of the Hellenic Republic to say a few words.
Good evening everybody, καλησπέρα. I hope you will enjoy the evening and χρόνια πολλά. Thank you.
The series that we put together, we call Up from the Ashes, March 25th, 1821, We Are All Greeks. And that's the theme on a yearly basis. And that obviously comes from the great poem by Shelley, which is Alas. And in a sense, we are all Greeks. Not only the people who have their ethnic background as being Greek, but also all Western civilization to a certain degree owes a lot to the Hellenic past. This event is a little different. Typically what I do on a yearly basis is I have 3 scholars speaking on various topics. For example, last year we had someone speak on the Ηεllenic and his relationship to the Hellenic Revolution. We had someone speak on the Orlov Rebellion as a precursor to the revolution. We had someone speak on the American influence and the help that the Americans did during that period in Greece itself. And every year there's always typically three professors, scholars speaking on different topics. And the way we introduce the topics is we say that we're basically going to have mezedes. In other words, we're going to have 3 speakers, and each one will give a little mezet. And basically what happens is you learn some things, and then you go back and you study those particular items. I have literally asked Anthoussa for 2 to 3 years, I think, to be a speaker at this particular event. And every time I spoke to her, she said, I'll do whatever you want, but I think it's not enough time to discuss my particular topic. And certainly her topic, which is the role of Greek women in the Greek War of Independence, is an extremely important topic. It's a topic that's not mentioned historically the way it should be. Certainly, the women before the revolution and during the revolution and after the revolution had tremendous roles in everything that took place in Hellenic history. In the classroom, we learn about, certainly about Laskarina Bouboulina and what she did. Some of us, on occasion, learn about Manto Lavroyenu. And I'm pleased to say that we have a relative of us sitting in the 2nd row. Please raise your hand. Okay. And obviously for those who are, let's say, from Epirus, they always think of Moscow Zavela, okay, who was a very important heroine, and who, as a matter of fact, in one of the wars against Ali Pasha, actually led a band of 400 women that actually fought the Turks themselves. And certainly historically, you will see the help not only in the support that they provide, but also in actual warfare. You'll see them in Epirus. You'll see them in Mani, when the women defended Mani against the Ottoman Turks who invaded Mani. So there's a lot of things that history, again, sort of quiets down. But tonight, it's not going to be quiet. So I'd like to introduce a scholar who doesn't want to present herself that often, but someone who's very important to us, Anthoussa Diakopoulou.
Your Eminence, distinguished guests, φίλες και φίλοι. Είναι μεγάλη τιμή και χαρά για μένα που με αφορμή τον εορτασμό της Εθνικής Επετείου μου δόθηκε η ευκαιρία να επικοινωνήσω μαζί σας με αυτόν τον τρόπο. Το θέμα που θα συζητήσουμε σήμερα, ο ρόλος της γυναίκας στην Ελληνική Επανάσταση του 1821, είναι και πολύ ενδιαφέρον και πολύ διάστατο, όμως δυστυχώς ο χρόνος που διαθέτουμε λείπει. Όταν αναλύουμε και αποτιμούμε γεγονότα ή προσωπικότητες μιας συγκεκριμένης χρονικής περίοδου, θα πρέπει πάντα να τις τοποθετούμε μέσα στο ιστορικό πλαίσιο και τις κοινωνικές δομές που επικρατούσαν τη δεδομένη στιγμή. Όταν αναλογιστούμε λοιπόν ότι ακόμα και στις μέρες μας η ισότιμη συμμετοχή της γυναίκας στην κοινωνία δεν θεωρείται πάντα αυτονόητη, καταλαβαίνουμε πόσο σημαντική ήταν η συμμετοχή των γυναικών σε έναν αγώνα εθνικής ανεξαρτησίας στις αρχές του 19ου αιώνα. Για τον ίδιο λόγο, μερικές δεκαετίες πριν, οι ιστορικοί θεωρούσαν ότι ήταν περιττό να αναφέρονται σε πράξεις γυναικών, εκτός αν αυτές είχαν κάτι το πολύ ξεχωριστό. Το ίδιο ισχύει και με την ιστορία της Ελληνικής Επανάστασης. Κάποιος ιστορικός έγραψε ότι η ιστορία της Ελληνικής Επαναστάσεως κατέληξε να μοιάζει με τις μονές του Αγίου Όρους, όπου φιλικό κανενός είδους δεν εισχωρεί. Οι πρώτοι ιστορικοί του αγώνα δεν αναφέρονται παραελάχιστα στις γυναίκες της εποχής εκείνης και πραγματικά είναι σαν ερευνητής όταν βλέπεις ιστοριοδίφες να παίρνουν συνεντεύξεις, ας πούμε, από την αδελφή του Μάρκου Μπότζαρη, η οποία συμμετείχε στον αγώνα και απλώς γράφει μία πρόταση, του είπε πολλά περί του πολυταράχου βίου της, λες, δεν μπορούσε να πει και κάτι ακόμα. Γι' αυτό το λόγο, η δουλειά του σημερινού ιστορικού είναι πολύ δύσκολη, μια και τα στοιχεία που διαθέτουμε είναι λίγα και διασκορπισμένα και γι' αυτό δυσέβρετα. Είναι όμως εμφανές σε κάθε ερευνητή ότι η Ελληνίδα συμμετείχε πλήρως στον αγώνα για την ελευθερία. I'm pretty sure that all you expect to hear is about the achievements of famous women in the battlefield. We will definitely pay tribute to these courageous women, but before referring to them, I find it compulsory to refer to some other groups of women who may have not actively grabbed the arms to fight, but have contributed greatly to the achievement of the Greek independence. For example, the educated women who spread the word of freedom, the very few women agents of the Φιλική Εταιρεία, and the women Ηεllenics, the Ηεllenides. The spread of education is not only important for the well-being of any nation, but it is very strongly connected with the rise of nationalism, which eventually leads to the outbreak of revolution demanding national independence. Through education that spread almost exclusively by the Greek Orthodox Church, Greek people not only maintained their ancestral language, but also realized that they were the direct descendants of the glorious ancient Greeks. During the early 19th century, the idea of nationalism developed in Western Europe, and through the educated people, spread in Greece and the Balkans in general. So, more and more people came to realize that they were ruled by an alien power, the Ottoman Turks, who not only had a different religion, but also had different national backgrounds and a different language. In addition, through education, many people managed to improve their social and economic status, traveled, and saw how Western European states were governed, and realized that they only had to gain by the creation of a Western-type independent Greek state in which they themselves could play a more important role. Unfortunately, we don't have the time to discuss the connection of education and nationalism at this time, but it's obvious that anybody contributing to the spread of education was actually contributing to the cause of independence. Due to the social conditions prevailing at the time of the Ottoman occupation, it was mostly men that received any form of education. We know, however, that in the village schools, where usually the parish priest taught the children how to read and write, there were sometimes girls attending. But we have no evidence of girls reaching higher levels of education, as most of the famous schools were within the monasteries. It was thus mostly daughters of the richer families who could afford private tutors that managed to reach higher standards of education. These women became ardent advocates of the Greek cause, read the revolutionary writings of Rigas Phareos, and taught their children to believe in the eventual renaissance of the Greek nation. In his memoirs, Plapoutas, one of Kolokotronis' friends and a brave fighter in the War of Independence, wrote something that verifies the fact that women were agents of ideas and freedom. While describing life in the Peloponnese in the late 18th century, a few decades before the War of Independence began, before the outbreak of the revolution, he wrote, «Η γυναίκα του Ημωρογιάννενα, η κυρία Μαρία, ήταν από ευγενικό σπίτι της Μύρνης. Πήγαινε και ερχόταν τακτικά εκεί και έφερνε πνοές, ιδέες και γνώμες για τους πανάρχαιους, τους παλιούς και τους τωρινούς καλούς του έθνους για τα περασμένα μεγαλεία της Ελλάδας». When talking about the educated women of the pre-revolutionary Greece, one cannot avoid talking about Avanthia Kairi. Avanthia Kairi was one of the most important female figures of the 19th century Greece. She was born on the island of Andros on 1799 and was the youngest sister of the priest Theophilos Kairis, who was one of the major representatives of the Greek Enlightenment. He studied in the school of Kydonieis, otherwise known as Ηεllenic, in Asia Minor, in Patmos and Chios, and after he was ordained priest, he went to Italy and France, where he met Adamantios Korais. There he came in contact with the ideas of the Enlightenment. I open a small parenthesis here. As I said, while in Europe, Kairis, as many other Greek scholars, came in contact with the ideas of the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment, or the Age of Reason, was an ideological movement that appeared in Europe, mainly in France, but in England and in other European countries, in the 17th and 18th century, and focused on improving human society. The movement covered political, scientific, and economic issues, and it is considered very important because it changed the prevailing attitudes. Our modern Western societies and way of government are based on the ideas of the Enlightenment. The ideas of the Enlightenment reached Greece at the end of the 18th century and early 19th century. The Greek representatives of the Enlightenment involved themselves mainly in philosophy and history, as at the historical moment, the objective was to teach the enslaved people their national and historical origins, and to make them understand their historical perspective. So to go back to Theophilos and Avanthia Kairi, in 1812, Theophilos Kairis returned to his native Andros, and in the same year, when he was called back in Kydonieis to teach, he took along his sister. I have to mention here that Kydonieis, Ηεllenic, was enjoying special privileges from the Sultan at this time, and because of that had become a flourishing city in all sectors of life. Commerce was booming, local production was strengthened, and transport expanded. As a consequence, education was developing as well, and the Academy of Kydonieis was one of the most famous in the Greek world. When Avanthia arrived with her brother in Ηεllenic, she was 13 years old. She was very clever and just absorbed everything her brother taught her. She was surrounded by important teachers, students eager to learn, and a library, and of course her brother who wanted to see her develop. In 2 years' time, she learned French and Italian and was able to translate from ancient Greek. As a result, since she became one of the most advanced students, she started teaching the younger pupils according to the prevailing Bell-Lancaster method, educational method of the time. In Greek, we call it allelodidactiki. According to this method, the more advanced students taught the children that didn't know how to read and write, and it was an easy way, at the time that teachers were scarce, to educate more people. This method was used in Europe and in Greece until well in the beginning of the 20th century. At this time, many of the intellectuals kept correspondence with Adamantios Korais, who lived in Paris. One could spend hours talking about this great figure who played a very important role in the formation of the modern Greek state. Very briefly, we could say that Korais made it his mission in life to spread education in Greece, since he believed that only through education, his contemporary Greeks would realize their glorious past, as well as their potential to reach a much higher standard of living relative to that of ancient Greece, and thus eventually overthrow the Ottoman Empire. To achieve his goal, Korais translated many books into Greek so that Greeks could be updated with the contemporary writings in the West, collected books in order to establish libraries all over Greece, found sources to finance the studies of young Greeks, and kept correspondence with many intellectuals, thus encouraging them and giving them advice in their difficult task of educating Greek people. Taking advantage of her brother's relationship with Korais, Avanthia very timidly started corresponding with him. From his replies to her, but also from letters to other scholars of the time, we realize that Korais was very impressed by this bright young girl. He sent her books related to the education of women and easy-to-read texts for younger students to translate. Avanthia translated many books, but also wrote many herself. As she wrote once to Korais, she made it her duty to spread education and in this way help her nation. Και ούτω να ωφελήσω κατά την δύναμή μου το γένος ημών. In all her life, she remained very timid. She used pseudonyms in her publications in order to avoid publicity around her name. She must have realized that she was among the very few women in Greek mainland to reach such high standards of education and actually attend an institution of higher education. Her high intelligence and the depth of her knowledge impressed famous scholars and travelers of the time who met her. She was trying to spread education among women as she believed that they were the core, the nucleus of each family, and as a consequence of society itself. To understand how far ahead she was of her times, it was much later in the 1830s when Φιλεκπαιδευτική εταιρεία was founded that they also, Φιλεκπαιδευτική εταιρεία Arsakion, that we all know the Arsakion schools, for the Arsakiades in the room, that they had it as a mission to teach girls because they were the nucleus, the core of the family and thus of society. And she was doing that before the revolution. She believed in that. She was trying to teach the girls the basics, but at the same time spread the message that the time of freedom was approaching. Her brother was a member of Φιλική εταιρεία, so it is very probable that she had become aware of the message of Φιλική εταιρεία. Very briefly, we could say that Φιλική εταιρεία, the aim of Φιλική εταιρεία was to organize under the strictest secrecy as many Greeks as possible with the goal to overthrow the Ottoman Empire and create an independent Greek state. So, Avanthia made it her task to awaken national feelings among the illiterate Greek women. She was teaching, writing letters, sending books, and communicating in any way she could with other women so as to make sure that the message of freedom would reach as many as possible. For this reason, she established this girls' school in Kidonias. It was the first time that the girls got an organized form of education. There, Avanthia tried to awaken them, keep them interested, and fill them with enthusiasm. When the revolution broke out, she followed her brother to their native Andros and participated actively in all the difficulties that the island went through. She never stopped teaching, writing, and communicating with intellectuals, women, and politicians all over the world. She died on Andros in August 1866 after seeing Greece being liberated. It would be an omission, however, if we don't mention an event which shows her character and her determination to see her country free. In 1825, when the great powers were still undecisive as to whether they would support the Greek cause or not, since they still favored the Ottoman Empire, which represented stability and the maintenance of the status quo, Avanthia Kairi decided to write a letter to the European women in order to make them realize what was actually going on in her country. She addressed her letter to the Ηεllenides. In this letter, she was trying to remind them that they were all Christians. She wondered how the fellow Christians of Europe could remain indifferent while their fellow Christians in Greece were being slaughtered. Even worse than that, even supporting the infidels against the Christians. In her effort to shake them from their apathy, she wrote that the atrocities committed by the infidel Turks were not as painful to the Greeks as the inertia, the apathy of the fellow Christian Europeans who just watched them being killed, raped, and tortured. She finally wondered how future generations, how future history would explain and judge this apathy. This letter very well revealed her character. The proud Greek did not ask for help. She let the words which describe the pains of the Greeks with phrases such as «Τα νήπια θυλάζονται ακόμα τας νεκράς μητέρας των», babies still nursing their dead mothers, ενώ στην Ευρώπη συγκροτούσι χορούς και κάνουσι συμπόσια, while in the West they organized dinner parties and balls. So she used phrases as such to shock the European and American ladies, make them feel remorse for their inertia, and eventually help the Greek cause. We see that the letter did affect the Western ladies, and soon after they sent supplies to Greece. At the same time, the great powers realized that it was in their interest to have a small and weak independent Greek state, which would, however, depend on them for its survival, giving them so scope for interference. Amanthea was not the sole example of a highly educated woman who promoted education among men and women, and thus contributed to the success of the Greek War of Independence. I will very, very briefly refer to her contemporary female figure, Elisabeth Moudan Martinengu, from Zakynthos in the Ionian Islands. She lived a very short life. She was born in 1801 and died in 1832. She was coming from a noble Ionian family and was also educated by a local priest in Greek, ancient Greek and Latin. Her father possessed a very well-equipped library, and she taught herself French and Italian. She translated many books in Greek and wrote approximately 22 plays, 8 in Greek and the rest in Italian, in which she tried to express her frustration for the confined role of women. When the War of Independence broke, she repeatedly expressed her agony that society did not allow her to physically participate in the war. So I think at this time, it's about time to pay tribute to the women who dared to overcome the confines of their time and actually participated in the war. From the folk songs, τα δημοτικά τραγούδια, which were sung during the years of the Turkocratia, we very often see female bravery being admired and praised. Or we read about women who dressed as men and became klefts themselves. Ποιος είδε ψάρι στο βουνό και θάλασσα σπαρμένη, ποιος είδε κόρη όμορφη, στα κλέφτικα ντυμένη. 12 χρόνους έκαμε αρματολός και κλέφτης, κανείς δεν την εγνώρισε πως ήταν διαμάντο. So here it talks about a woman who dressed and managed to disguise herself for 12 years as a man and fought with the other klefts. As the time of the revolution approaches, there is a historic and heroic atmosphere among the Greeks. Women are bound to be influenced by this atmosphere, and they want to be part of it. We see women who prefer to become klefts rather than get married. Και η μάνα της τις έλεγε και η μάνα της τις λέει: «Δώσ' μου αρετή το λόγο σου για να σαραβωνιάσω. Δες το είπα μάνα μια φορά, δες το είπα 3 και 5. Δεν πάω εγώ στη Δήμητρα ούτε στη Δημητσάνα. Θα πάω στα Καλάβρητα που είναι τα παλικάρια, όπου φορούν τα τσάμικα, τις ασημοπιστόλες, όπου φορούν τις φέρμελες και έχουν βαριά τουφέκια. The mother is asking the daughter to promise to get engaged, but she prefers to join the klefts in the mountains. As I stated earlier, our sources are very fragmented, and the historian struggles to find information. Even so, however, it becomes obvious that women fought side by side with men to achieve independence and very often suffered humiliation, rape, slavery, and torture in the hands of the Turks. Women helped in all aspects of war. For example, in Messolongi, women were helping to build the trenches and the fortification, and during the siege, apart from fighting, they collected the Turkish bullets so as to melt them and reuse them. In addition, they worked as nurses. A German philhellene, Daniel Helster, wrote in his memoirs that he got wounded during the Battle of Petta. He was then saved by the care and nursing of Athoussa Meyer, a girl from Messolongi, who was married to a Swiss doctor. She had offered money to build a hospital in Messolongi, and during the siege, she worked as a nurse herself. We have more evidence that many women worked as practical self-taught doctors and saved the lives of the wounded during the war or during the sieges when epidemics spread. Women became heroines when they were brutally tortured or tempted by wealth and privileges to denounce their Christian faith and become Muslims, and in so doing saved their life and that of their children. In order to avoid humiliation and torture, we have hundreds of cases when women realized that they could not escape captivity, they killed themselves and their children. The most famous case is that of the women in Zalombo, the Souliotises, who, when they realized that they could not defend themselves any longer, they started singing and dancing according to the folk song, and threw their children and themselves down the ravine of Zalongo. They would rather die than allow themselves to fall into the hands of the infidels. The case of Zalongo was not the only one. We very often read of similar incidents. For example, a woman in Kyparissia who managed to save her child from their burning house, but could not run fast enough to avoid the Turks chasing her, threw her baby and then herself down a sharp rock. When Ibrahim Pasha of Egypt was trying to bring down the Greek Revolution, we very often read in the memoirs of contemporaries incidents where women preferred to drown themselves in wells, rivers, or the sea, or threw their children and themselves down cliffs or ravines, rather than survive as slaves of the Egyptian or the Turkish army, the Ottoman army. At the same time that we witness this heroic negation of life, however, we also witness the exact opposite, the heroic defense of life in any way possible. A good example were the women in Diros in the Peloponnese. When Ibrahim Pasha attacked Mani unexpectedly, women were in the fields harvesting. When they realized that their villages were being attacked, they grabbed their sickles and any other tool and ran to help their husbands fight the Egyptian army. What we see here are simple women determined to live, fighting like Amazons for their lives and for their homelands. It is one of these cases in which the idea of life and freedom transforms common people into heroes. Apart from all these anonymous women that we see in the folk songs or in the memoirs of contemporary fighters, travelers, or diplomats, there is a number of women who, because of their unique bravery and character, have come down to history as heroines. Mandou Mavrogenous was the most romantic female figure in the Greek War of Independence. She came from a very noble family. Her uncle was the Prince of Wallachia in Romania, and her father was a very high-ranking official in his army. She was born in Trieste, where her father sought refuge when the Turks decapitated his brother. As a result, she was very well educated. As she was very gifted, she spoke many languages and was very good in music as well. When her father died a few years before the revolution, she went to the island of Tinos to live with her uncle Papamavros. This man was a pious priest who was not only a good patriot, but was very well educated. Papamavros was a member of the Filiki Eteria. Again, we don't know how much her uncle had revealed about Filiki Eteria. What we know, however, is that this man contributed greatly in the formation of her ideology and her nationalistic patriotic activities. When the revolution broke out, she and her uncle moved to Mykonos, her mother's hometown. There, the people established a council in which Mandou was accepted to participate. I mean, this is very rare to have a woman participating in a council. She started donating in order to help the revolution. She armed 2 battleships by herself and sent at her own expense a boat to Piraeus to buy ammunition. Her aim was to organize a military body to defend Mykonos in case of attack. When in 1822 an Algerian pirate ship attacked the island, this group, led by Mandou, managed to defend the island successfully. Soon after that incident, she boarded on a battleship that she was maintaining and went to help in the siege of Evia. For her brave conduct in this campaign, she was the only woman to be appointed Lieutenant General by the Greek government. When the efforts of the Greek army was concentrating to liberate Sterea Ellada, she did not hesitate to join forces and participate in that campaign also. Meanwhile, she was called back to Mykonos as the Turkish fleet was menacing the Aegean Islands. When she arrived, the Mykoniates awarded her with the same laurel wreath reserved for the Olympic Games winners. It was actually a decision of the National Assembly to award the war heroes with the laurel wreath of the Olympic Games winners. She participated in all the assemblies, the national assemblies that the fighters held, and advised her fellow countrymen wisely. In addition, she spent all her property, cash, land, and jewelry in order to support the revolution. During the civil war, she did not take sides. On the contrary, she advocated reconciliation. The Ηellenics that arrived in Greece to help gave her the idea to write to women in France and England to ask for their support. Her letter to the French ladies, dated August 12, 1824, could be characterized as very progressive for its time, very severe, with hard truths, at times satirical, and of course nationalistic in its essence. Very often, she reached into extremes, especially if one considers that she was asking for help. It is, I think, worthwhile to read a few lines just to give you an idea of how this woman thought and expressed herself. So she says, among other things, μια κόρη απλή που ανετράφει σε ένα βράχο και μεγάλωσε στη θλίψη, μία αναπνέουσα παρά το πατριωτισμό, θα ακουστεί άραγε από ένα πλήθος γυναικών βυθισμένων στις απολαύσεις της ζωής, στην πολυτέλεια, στις χαρές της τέχνης και του πολιτισμού. So she said, how could a simple but patriotic girl be heard by women who have grown up in luxury and the joys of art and civilization? Και δεν κινδυνεύω να γελιοποιηθώ αν μιλήσω για την επαναστατημένη ηρωική μου πατρίδα σε γυναίκες που δεν ασχολούνται παρά με τις επαναστάσεις της μόδας. Έτσι, I run the risk of being ridiculed talking about the revolution to women that they only care about the revolution of fashion. And she goes further down. Η αγάπη προς τη χώρα μου, η προσήλωση αυτή στη θρησκεία μου, η δίψα μιας δίκαιης εκδικήσεως έδωσαν έξαρση στην ψυχή μου και μου άναψαν το πάθος των αγώνων. Λαχταρώ μια μέρα μάχης, όπως εσείς λαχταράτε την ώρα ενός χορού. I longed for a day in the battlefield as you longed for an invitation to a ball. Το μόνο κοινό σημείο ανάμεσά μας είναι οι φυσικές εκείνες χάρες με τις οποίες μας επρίκησε ο ουρανός. Διαφέρουμε όμως στον τρόπο με την οποία τις χρησιμοποιούμε. Εσείς τις χρησιμοποιείτε κατά τρόπο αντίθετο προς τον προορισμό τους και δεν είσαστε παραπαθητικά όντα μέσα στην κοινωνία. Ευτυχέστεροι από εσάς, χρησιμοποιώ τις χάρες αυτές κατά τον αναγκαίο και πρέποντα τρόπο και τούτο μου έφερε δόξα, τιμές και τεράστιες εύνοίες. And she goes on. Εσείς βλέπετε τους άνδρες σαν θαυμαστές των σελγήτρων σας. Εγώ τους βλέπω σαν τα στηρίγματα της χώρας μου. So you consider men as admirers of your beauty. I consider them as the pillars of my country. And she goes on. Τους δένετε στο άρμα σας για να τους θαμπόσετε με τη λάμψη σας, ενώ εγώ τους δένω στο άρμα μου για να τους κάνω να πετάξουν προς τη δόξα. Έτσι, you try to dazzle them with your beauty, but I dazzle them so that they can get glorified. Οι θαυμαστές μου γίνονται άνδρες, ενώ οι δικοί σας παραμένουν σκλάβοι. My admirers become men, while yours remain slaves. Οι περισσότεροι από τους δημόσιους άνδρες σας συνομωτούν για το ατομικό τους όφελος εναντίον του κράτους. Ποτέ μια γυναικεία θελκτική φωνή δεν ακούγεται να τους λέει να είναι καλοί πολίτες και παραμένουν κακοί υπουργοί, φιλοχρήματοι και σερνάμενοι πολιτικάνιδες. Στη Μύκονο, στην Εύβοια, στη Φωκίδα, μετέτρεψα το ατομικό συμφέρον και την αγάπη για τις απολαύσεις στην αγάπη για την πατρίδα. And she finishes. Οι Έλληνες, γεννημένοι για την ελευθερία, μόνο στους ίδιους τους εαυτούς μπορούν να την οφείλουν. Έτσι, δεν εκλιπαρώ διόλου τη συνδρομή σας εις το να κάνετε τους συμπατριώτες σας να στείλουν βοήθεια, αλλά μόνο εις το να τους αποτρέψετε να βοηθήσουν τους εχθρούς μας. So she says that Greeks were born to be free and they will achieve their freedom by themselves and for themselves. So I'm not begging for your help or for asking for help. I just want you to intervene so they stop supporting our enemies. Her letter to the English ladies was much shorter and in a completely different tone. She wrote to them that they were Greeks and that for the Greeks this war was a matter of life and death. Ελευθερία ή θάνατος, νίκη ή θάνατος. And she was pleading for help in the name of their common Christian faith. After the end of the war, Mandó Mavrogenous went to settle in Nafplio in the house that the Greek government had promised her. She was penniless. A French traveler who met her wrote about her unselfishness. She kept on saying that all she cared for was the freedom of her country. She had spent all her property for the War of Independence. Her mother and sister denounced her for that, accusing her that she was responsible for the destruction of their family, as she even sold the family heirlooms. The house that the Greek state gave her, according to the descriptions of an Italian traveler Ηellenic, was in such a bad state that it was ready to collapse any minute. The government gave her a small pension as a widow. When she wrote to complain to King Otto that she has never been married, and thus could not be a widow, but on the contrary, she herself was a lieutenant general, she could have had the pension of a lieutenant general, she never got an answer. In poor health, she finally retired in the Cyclades and stayed with relatives in Syros, Mykonos, Tinos, and Paros. She died on the island of Paros in 1840 at the age of 44. She had the pleasure to see the country be free. Domna Visvisi was another heroine of the revolution. She came from Enos in eastern Thrace. When the war started, she followed her husband in their ship Kalomira, which was actually a battle ship with 16 cannons and 140 men. What was happening the last years before the revolution, and especially after the Treaty of Kytouka-Energy, which ended the Russo-Turkish War in 1774, the Greeks were allowed to use, they were under the protection of Russia. So they had special privileges, and that's how they flourished as well. I mean, commerce flourished. And because of the piracy, they were allowed to carry guns and carry cannons on their boats. So when the revolution actually broke out, many Greek-owned ships were equipped with cannons. So that battleship had 16 cannons and 140 men crew. They sailed the Aegean and reinforced the Greek army fighting in the mainland. When her husband was killed in 1822, she took over. She patrolled the shores of Evia with her troops while the troops were trying to liberate the island, and she besieged Chalkida. There are many documents showing the gratitude of the leaders of Evia for her role in the liberation of the island. Odysseus Androutsos, one of the main leaders of Sterea Ellada in the Greek mainland, wrote to her to thank her for supplying his forces with food and ammunition. Without her support, he wrote, his army would not have been able to succeed in liberating the area. Domna Visvisi maintained her boat at her own expense until 1824. When she could not do that anymore, she donated it to the Greek government, and we know that this boat was used later by Pipinos as a burlot to burn the Turkish fleet. She also retired in Napoleon, where a number of misfortunes let her lose all her savings. The state could not afford to support her. The only thing that they did was to send her son, Themistoklis Dimitrios, to Paris to study along with the sons of other fighters of the revolution. The Ηellenic Committee of Paris printed postcards in order to collect money to support Greece. His portrait, they say that he was a very good-looking boy, so his portrait was in one of these postcards. The script underneath were his mother's words when he left Greece. Γεια σου, και να μην ξεχνάς ότι ανατρέπεσαι από τη γενοδορία των Γάλλων. Σαν μεγαλώσεις ίσως εγώ δεν ζω, αλλά να εκδικηθείς το θάνατο του πατέρα σου. The first Austrian ambassador in Greece, A. Austen, wrote in his memoirs that Asimina Goura was one of the most interesting figures in the Greek War of Independence. Her husband was appointed by Odysseus Androutsos, commander of the garrison of the city of Athens, that is the Acropolis. So she and her husband lived in the Acropolis. When in 1826, Kütahya Pasha tried to take back the city of Athens and besiege the castle of Athens, Gouras was killed. Asimina had all his soldiers take an oath on the icon that she placed over his dead body that they would continue fighting. She took her dead husband's arms and patrolled the trenches of the Acropolis, encouraged the soldiers, and nursed the wounded. The besieged organized a committee to govern the garrison until the government would send a substitute. Asimina was one of its 5 members. She died a few days later a few weeks later, when the roof of the Erechtheion, where she lived in the Acropolis, collapsed. We cannot talk about the Greek War of Independence without referring to the notorious Laskarina Bouboulina. She was a tall woman who loved the sea and knew how to swim, navigate a ship, and ride a horse from a very young age. When her second husband, Dimitrios Bouboulis, was drowned during a battle in 1811, she was left with 6 children. She was business-minded, so not only did she maintain her property, but enlarge it as well. The Sultan tried to confiscate her property, but through clever handling, she managed to rescue it. Thus, just before the outbreak of the War of Independence, she built a new ship, Agamemnon, which was carrying 18 cannons. When the revolution broke, she joined immediately her forces, and she was one of the first to arrive with her ship Agamemnon in the siege of Nafplion. From Nafplion, she went on horseback to encourage the people besieging the nearby city of Argos. She brought them money, ammunition, and food. One of the historians of the time wrote, «Αυτή, απέδευτη μεν όλος, αλλά μεγαλόφρον και ελευθεριάζουσα, ενδεδειμένη ως γυνή και οπλισμένη ως ανήρ, ήρθε εν το μέσο των αργίων και όλων την νέαν προς τον πόλεμον ορμήν εξύψε. Η Λασκαρίνα, αναπληρούσα των σύζυγών της ως χειρεύουσα, μόνη εδιοίκη ήδη των πολεμικών μετασχηματιστέν πλοίων αυτής και πρώτη ενέπνευσε τη σπάση και σέβας προς αυτήν και φιλοτιμία προς τον πόλεμο. Ενώπιον ταύτης, ο άνανδρος ανήρ ισχύνεντο και ο Ανδρείος υπεχώρη. So, briefly, an uneducated woman, dressed as a woman but armed as a man, she inspired respect for herself and dedication to the war. Next to her, the coward man felt ashamed and the brave retreated. Bouboulina participated in many of the war conferences, and her opinion on how to conduct war was always taken seriously. Her battleships actually, were present all over Greece. While her brother was with one of her ships in the siege of Nafplion, herself with Agamemnon was in Monemvasia, and her son with the third one in Galaxidi. Her fame surpassed the Greek borders. Foreigners who came to Greece sought to meet her. In their memoirs, we read how much they admired her. Artists were inspired and drew portraits of her, although they had never seen her. It is said that one of the Philhellenes presented her with such a depiction. She saw the picture, and she was a loud person. She burst into a very loud laughter. She was not a good-looking woman, and the lithography that was presented to her showed her as an Amazon or a Jeanne d'Arc, so it was not her at all. Apart from taking part in naval battles, she also participated in campaigns inland. One of the most important ones was the siege of Tripolis. She became friendly with Kolokotronis, and she was accused for participating in the looting of the city afterwards. Actually, her daughter Elena got married to the son of Kolokotronis, Panos. When Nafplion was finally liberated, she settled there, and later on she moved on the island of Spetses. She died on May 22, 1825, and the irony was that she was killed by accident. I mean, she had survived all the battles, and she died by accident. There are many more figures that we could mention, and many more incidents to narrate, but I don't want to tire you. However, before I finish, I feel we must say very few words about the participation of women in the Φιλικιετερία. As we said earlier, Φιλικιετερία was a secret society founded in the beginning of the 19th century with an explicitly and purely political objective, namely the liberation of the motherland, an end that was to be achieved through armed revolt. Partly under the influence of the Masonic prototypes, they evolved an elaborate ritual of initiation, which required the aspiring member to swear undying hatred towards the tyrants of his country and to accept death as the inevitable punishment for the betrayal of the secrets of Φιλικιετερία. Makrigiannis, in his memoirs, describes how he was initiated, and actually he says that they first told him a few things, they gave him 8 days to think about it, and then if he was willing to take the risk, he could go back and be initiated and learn the secrets. Very few women, as far as we know at least, became members of the Ηellenic Εταιρεία. It is said that Bouboulina was initiated during her trips to Constantinople when she was trying to save her property that the Sultan wanted to confiscate. It is interesting, however, to mention another incident where a woman became a member by an accident because it shows the climate of the time. There was a doctor in Smyrna called Naftis. Very often, the members of the Ηellenic Εταιρεία held their secret meetings in his house. Once he forgot to lock some documents, and his wife discovered them and read them. You know, the wife cleaned, as always, cleaning the mess. So she read them, and she was terrified. So she asked him to explain what it was all about. He panicked, and for a moment he thought of killing her. Fortunately, he changed his mind. He locked her up and went to discuss the issue with the other members of the Ηellenic Εταιρεία. They finally decided not to kill her, but to initiate her as well. She proved worthy of their trust because later on we find her on Greek mainland, where she had given large part of her property in order to support the Greek War of Independence. From letters, memoirs, and other sources, we know that many other women were aware of the existence of the Ηellenic Εταιρεία, especially in the years just before the outbreak of the revolution. Θα μπορούσαμε να μιλάμε για ώρες για το ρόλο των γυναικών στην Ελληνική Επανάσταση του 1921. Και με αυτά τα λίγα όμως που είπαμε, βλέπουμε πως η Ελληνίδα κράτησε επάξια το ρόλο της σε όλους τους τομείς. Μέσω της εκπαίδευσης, μεταλαμβάνευσε την δίψα για ελευθερία και όταν ήρθε η κατάλληλη στιγμή, δεν δίστασε να πιάσει τα όπλα και να παλέψει επάξια δίπλα στους άντρες.
Please, another round of applause for fabulous. For our closing remarks, and then I'll have just a few announcements. Please, Archbishop Demetrius, if you can honor us with a few words.
Mr. Ambassador, Consul General, Mr. Kassos, of the excellent organizing this evening. During the last 3 years, in one occasion after the other, we have been really excelling in offering quality and substance. And we are very thankful for that. Είμαστε ευγνώμονες γιατί προσφέρατε ουσία και ποιότητα στη μνήμη του 1821. Tonight we heard a fascinating presentation. Just fascinating. You used the term fabulous. I think we are in problematic condition in finding the proper adjectives to characterize such a presentation. It was an unexpected, really, kind of narrative, suspense, clarity, and unknown things and items from history. I mean, Mandoma Vrogenus and Laskarina Bouboulina, more or less known. But the profile that you presented of Amanthoussa Kairis, the text, the letter sent by Amanthoussa Kairis and Mandoma Vrogenus to the ladies of Europe, in the language they was written. That's amazing things, by the way. I mean, they should be studied by sociologists and other wise men to see how really brave women and wise women could do things that are impossible otherwise. Not to talk about the example, you didn't comment much on the example of this Diamando, a young lady who for 12 years she was fighting along with men against the Turks and never revealed that she was a woman. I mean, these things are remarkable things that should be written in our memory, in our consciousness, as Greek Orthodox people. And the finale with the Ηellenic Εταιρεία, that was another thing. I mean, we know people who have lived in Athens for many years, the Skoufa and the other streets in honor of the initial and founders of the Ηellenic Εταιρεία. But I mean, for a lady that was so instrumental there, and the peculiar reversing of fate, I mean, when she discovered what she discovered. There are stories that are really both educating and entertaining. It's a real entertainment, because it creates a joy here in listening to that. As you were speaking, and you open a whole world of the women that contributed in the revolution of 1821. I remembered that just 4 Sundays ago, we had this celebration as church event of Sunday of Orthodoxy. Γιορτάσαμε πριν από 4 εβδομάδες τη Κυριακή της Ορθοδοξίας. Sunday of Orthodoxy was a feast established after the final victory of the iconophiles against iconoclasm. Ήταν μια γιορτή η οποία καθιερώθηκε από την Εκκλησία μετά την τελική νίκη των εικόνων έναντι των εικονοκλαστών, η οποία μάχη διήρκησε 140 περίπου χρόνια. But something that is not known is that who were the protagonists, because there were 2 synods to settle the issue. One was in 78-7 and the other was 1 century later. Who were the very instrumental people? 2 women, Theodora and Ηellenic η Αθηναία. Ηellenic the Athenian and Theodora. They were the empresses, they were either the wives or the mothers of emperors, and they were the ones that finally produced the tremendous result of the victory of the iconophiles, because without that victory, Byzantium would have fallen by internal fight already in the 9th century, and forget anything that could happen. But these 2 ladies saved, together with a number of people who heroically fought for that, and they were homologated. And so I thought of the role of these specific women in the history of, not only of Greece as a nation, but also as Orthodoxy. And I don't want now to go to the very educated, great women martyrs. That's St. Catherine. The adjective for St. Catherine in the ecclesiastical language and hymnology is Ipansofos Ekaterini. At a time when it was plenty of really illiterate men. Okay. So you hear of a lady who is just a Pansofos. I mean, it's such a brilliant mind. She was able to, in contest with the wise men of Alexandria, and be victorious. So you open up a tremendous page tonight. Mrs. Diakopoulou, you were presented with your family name. I had the privilege to know her father and her family, and it's a noble family. And so she's represented her family in the best way, and also as the wife of our ambassador and consul general here. And so we thank you so much for this thing, but we also have the organizing entity and the instrument of offering to us events like the one tonight. Under the given circumstances, this is one of the most worthy celebrations of the great revolution of 1821. And we thank you.
And again, thank the speaker, thank you Archbishop, thank you Council General, and thank you audience for coming tonight and celebrating Hellenic Independence Day.
Συνεχίζονται όμως οι εκδηλώσεις. Το Σάββατο όλη μέρα έχουμε, δεν ξεχνάμε την ονοματοδοσία του δρόμου στην ιστορία. έχουμε την πλατεία Αθηνών, έχουμε το βράδυ στο Χίλτον και φυσικά η αποκορύφωση μετά τη δοξολογία την Κυριακή στην παρέλαση στην Πέμπτη Λεωφόρο, όπου όλοι πρέπει να βρεθούμε, όλοι πρέπει να μετάσχουμε, είτε παρελάβνοντες είτε σαν θεατές και υποστηρικτές αυτών που παρελάβουν. Η Επανάσταση του 21 άλλαξε την πορεία του τόπου. Εμείς μετά από πολλούς πολέμους είχαμε την τύχη να κληρονομήσουμε μια πατρίδα σαν τη σημερινή και αυτό που πρέπει είναι να τη διατηρήσουμε, να την βελτιώσουμε και να την παραδώσουμε καλύτερη στα παιδιά μας. Ο καθένας από τον τομέα του, ο καθένας με τη σοβαρότητα που πρέπει να κάνει αυτό που του αναλογεί.
Ευχαριστώ για την ευκαιρία που μου δίνετε. Να πω ότι ο τουρισμός έχει ανέβει το προηγούμενο έτος 27% από την Αμερική. Παλεύουμε να ανεβάσουμε και τα νούμερα και από τον Καναδά. Πρόσφατα γύρισα, σήμερα μάλιστα γύρισα από το Μόντρεαλ, που έγινε μια εκδήλωση των Ελλήνων στο Μουσείο πρόξενο του κ. Σιγάλα. Είναι μεγάλη μου χαρά που είμαι εδώ. Ήταν μεγάλη έκπληξη και μεγάλος ενθουσιασμός μου να μάθω τόσα χρήσιμα στοιχεία από την κυρία Πρέσβη, την κυρία Αnthoussa Diakopoulou. Τις συγχαίρουμε όλοι, οι γυναίκες είναι παντού, ακόμα και όταν είναι κρυμμένοι της αυρή, και θα χαρούμε όλους να σας δούμε στην παρέλαση και στην Ελλάδα πολύ σύντομα, τώρα που ανοίγει ο καιρός, όλοι στην Ελλάδα το καλοκαίρι. Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ.
Ευχαριστώ για τον χρόνο.
MGTV USA. Οι δραστηριότητες της ελληνοαμερικανικής κοινότητας με βίντεο και πλήρες ρεπορτάζ. Επισκεφτείτε την ιστοσελίδα μας mgtvusa.com. Καλύπτουμε καθημερινά τα γεγονότα στην Ομογένεια.